What's up, sports fans? Curious Formula here, coming to you to talk about the 3 reasons why Nikki Haley lost in New Hampshire. But first, before we go on and talk, I need you to do something for me. I need you to like and subscribe and comment on the channel. Curious Formula, let your friends know we're bringing you some content. Working with a new group of vendors. We're going to put out some good content, some of the bells and whistles, but I need to talk to you now, and time is of the essence, so I'm just coming to you straight with no chaser. So the 3 reasons why Nikki Haley lost in New Hampshire. And let's start with number 1. First, she could not handle the pressure of being the alternative. Yes, even though Nikki Haley talked about being one-on-one against Donald Trump and having to take him on straight up, woman to man, mano a mano, she just wasn't up to the task. But she definitely grew in stature, grew her campaign, I think, in the right way, but it didn't manifest the fruit that I think she thought. Remember when Nikki Haley first started, of all the candidates, she was at 3% nationally, 3%. And she went from that to being a contender. How did she do that? She did the old-fashioned way. She did well in the debates. The first debate I watched of all the Republican candidates, there was a lot of expectations about Ron DeSantis. There was expectation about Tim Scott. There was even expectations about what Vivek Ramaswamy was going to do because he had been on the Breakfast Club and so many other places and was kind of an iconoclast. And people were like, wow, I really want to see him on the stage. But the person who shined the most consistently and definitely in that first one was Nikki Haley. She looked presidential. She looked good. She spoke well. She observed the time limits, and she said substantive points throughout her interactions. She stood above the fray, and she looked like somebody who actually took on the tone and tenor of a real contender. And her attributes were all great, right? And these are the few things I wrote down. She was a woman. She was a person of color, Indian American. Parents immigrated here legally, right? She was a governor of a state. She ran for the Republican nomination for governor and was the dark horse, no pun intended. She was somebody who the prognosticators in South Carolina and even within the Republican Party in South Carolina really didn't think was going to win that race. And in an upset, she won the nomination. And in a state like South Carolina, the Republican nominee is going to win the statewide race. And she did that. She was a candidate, remember, who took down the Confederate statues post Rodney King, post George Floyd. And granted, it was pressured by African American leadership and organizations in South Carolina, but she did what you want elected officials to do. They disagree with you, but public pressure has weighed on them. It makes them change their mind. That's exactly how the democratic process should work. And she adhered to that, and she capitulated and took the side of the moral side, I would say, of what needed to happen in that particular situation. She had foreign policy experience, and she was nominated to be the UN ambassador by Donald Trump and served admirably. When she left to go out of the administration, Donald Trump complimented her on the job that she had done. And polls showed, as she grew in stature in this race, that she would beat Biden by 17 points. But under the hot lights, under the pressure, under the attacks of her fellow contenders after she had done so well, she started to falter. She started to really have missteps and mistakes that when the lights are on you and people now have expectations of you, you cannot do. You cannot drop the ball. And she did. The whole Civil War effort, right? And I understand that, right? Politicians, as a former politician, we try to answer the question the way that we want to answer it, and we try to avoid the controversial stuff, right? We don't want to be seen as too controversial. Well, in her attempt to try to say, like, what was the real reasons for slavery, she tried to be, she tried to be political. She tried to nuance it, right? When the reality is, in the documents historically, particularly the Confederate Constitution and its articles of war, which mentioned slavery like 18 times, right? In the Constitution that they had in the fledgling Confederacy under Jefferson Davis, and his vice president, most importantly, who wrote specifically that this was about slavery. Even the debates that you can get right now on the floor of Congress from the states that left the nation, which South Carolina was the first, you see them saying we're leaving, and this is the reasons why. It's in the records of the congressional of the Congress, basically. But she tried to nuance it and say it was about states' rights, nullification and interposition and all those kinds of fancy terms, and government and the North dictating to the South. I mean, all those revisionist things that we talked about without actually looking at the very documents that we have right before us. And she didn't mention slavery. And then she says that the USA was never been racist, when she had throughout the whole campaign talked about the racism she suffered in South Carolina growing up a little brown girl. Second reason, though, why Nikki Haley lost in New Hampshire really goes to that she was never the choice of the never Trumpers and the anti-MAGA crowd. Do you remember what Chris Christie said when he left the race? He left the race, but he didn't endorse her. And he was on the hot mic before the town hall where he left the race, and he said quite emphatically, she's not up to snuff. She's not going to meet muster, right? And I'm being nice because Chris Christie has a way of saying things that is, kind of disturbing at times. I'm not a big fan of Chris Christie, but he said she wasn't up to snuff. And there's a whole cadre of Republicans out there, mainstream, conservative, Ronald Reagan type Republicans out there who don't like Donald Trump. They won't say it publicly, but in circles that I'm in, they say it privately, and they dread, right, the takeover of the MAGA crowd of the party, not only in terms of Congress and at the federal level, but the state and local levels as well. And these elected officials who are Republicans who want to get things done, even if I disagree with them politically and disagree with them on policy, really want to get things done and really want things to happen in Washington and in their states and locales. And they don't like sort of the grandstanding. There are a number of Republicans that are in Congress right now who don't have real staffs, but they have social media directors and they have communications directors because it's all about the positioning. And that's why nothing gets done, particularly in the Republican House, because you have the MAGA caucus, for lack of a better term, that really steps in the way of doing that. But stands in the way of doing that, But there is a wing of traditional conservatives, again, the Ronald Reagan model, the George Bush model, the Jack Kemp model, who really want to get things done, and they don't want Donald Trump. And they've been emphatic about it. And some of you know some of those people, like former Representative Cheney and Adam Zinziger and Chris Christie and a number of Christine Todd Whitman, another Jersey former governor, and they've been vocal about it, and they've been looking for a candidate. Mitt Romney even wrote an op-ed that talked about the strategy to stop Donald Trump from winning the nomination, and he spelled it out quite emphatically. He said, look, there's going to be a lot of candidates running, and so the field needs to be winnowed down and narrowed down very early, and the donor class needs to get behind one candidate early to make sure that Donald Trump did not get on a roll and just cakewalk through the nomination fight. And I think Nikki Haley was sort of positioning herself and getting to that position to be that person. But it was little too late. And she was never the consensus choice of the never Trumpers or the anti-MAGAs within the Republican Party, despite getting the endorsement of Governor Sununu in New Hampshire, the Koch brothers PAC that really helped her get a field game up in Iowa and New Hampshire. And I'm certainly will give her a few more dollars to at least eke out another effort in South Carolina, her home state, going forward. But she was never the consensus choice. And it didn't help her when she said things like she promised to pardon Trump if she won because it would heal the nation. That's not what the anti-MAGA never Trumpers want to hear. They want a complete clean break from the MAGA Trump present of their party. They want their party back, and they want a party that can appeal to independents. And the last reason why Nikki Haley lost in New Hampshire was the pack shrank too late. Yes, a week before the Iowa caucuses, Nikki Haley was actually polling at Nikki Haley was actually 4 points under Donald Trump in New Hampshire. So we knew Donald Trump was going to win in Iowa. We knew that he was going to stomp Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. The fight was really for second place. But what was interesting is as her name rose, as her popularity rose, as people started catching on, listening to her, she started moving hearts and minds in New Hampshire. And so a week before the Iowa caucuses, she was 4 points down to Trump, which is the margin of error, which means it was a dead heat. And so what we talked about, another video that I have that's actually on this page, please check it out, 5 reasons why Nikki Haley couldn't win the Republican nomination. Obviously, that didn't work out too well on my behalf. But what we talked about then was that New Hampshire like to do the opposite of what Iowa does, right? New Hampshire values being considered the first in the nation primary as opposed to the Iowa caucuses. And so in 2008, you had a young senator named Barack Obama who wins Iowa and is 10 points up in New Hampshire. But New Hampshire wanted to give Hillary Clinton another shot at it, and they deliver what was then an upset of Obama in New Hampshire. Likewise, Mike Huckabee in 2008 wins Iowa caucuses, and John McCain comes back and wins New Hampshire. Again, look no further than 2016, that Ted Cruz barely wins Iowa caucuses, but then Donald Trump comes back and wins New Hampshire. New Hampshire liked to be the contrarian state. And so it boded well that if Nikki Haley could get some kind of momentum and not get stomped in Iowa, the momentum would flow to her in New Hampshire. That didn't happen. The only guy that got momentum coming out of Iowa was Donald Trump. People started endorsing him. Vivek Ramaswamy leaves the race, endorses him. Ron DeSantis leaves the race this last weekend, endorses Donald Trump. Tim Scott endorses Donald Trump. You start seeing senators coming out and endorsing him. You start seeing the ground move to a coronation. And Nikki Haley, a week before Iowa caucuses, is only 4 points behind him in New Hampshire. And that week and a half between Iowa and New Hampshire, she fell further behind. She was down by 8 to 14 points in the last Monmouth poll right before Tuesday, right before the election in New Hampshire. And so the pack shrank late. She wanted to be that one-on-one with the anti-Trump versus Trump and get on the stage with him, but the people left the race too late. And she was never able to become the viable alternative to Donald Trump. And Iowa and New Hampshire have shown that. Now, she will carry on. She will run. She will make it to her home state of South Carolina, and she will get drubbed there by at least 30 points if she can survive to get the vote there. And then I expect her to leave the race. But I think it's very interesting that we learned a couple of things about Nikki Haley with that loss that we'll talk about in future videos. If you like the content, please like and subscribe and comment and tell others about it. We're building this as we fly. Stay curious.